All right, welcome to the podcast, Not Your Doc Anymore, where we address the issues essential for your health and provide information to help you become your best advocate. We encourage empowerment through education. Here to address this topic is a real doctor, Dr. Mark Witt. I cannot emphasize enough the power of physicians who understand clinical practice and are actually seeing patients on a regular basis and have had years of experience. Dr. Witt is a practicing pediatrician in Salt Lake City, Utah. For the past 30 years, he's board certified in pediatrics. He received his undergraduate degree at the University of Wisconsin-Madison with a bachelor in mathematics. He then attended the University of Wisconsin Medical School. His residency was at the University of Utah and completed that in 1997. He has been working here in town as a general pediatrician. He is currently at Family First Pediatrics. Mark, we've spent some good years working together at St. Mark's Hospital in Salt Lake City. It's awesome to be able to see you in this format.
Thank you.
Hey, on a little more personal note, I have to tell you that the most significant time we've spent together is in the hospital, but also on the ping pong table. I have this image of you at the ping pong table, and I just want to share this with you. I don't know if you can see that on your screen.
Nice.
I don't know if that's from your professional ping pong days. Do you know?
Yep. Good. Much younger then, for sure. Yeah.
So good. All right. One listener reached out in preparation for this and made the statement, Dr. Witt is my favorite. And I agree. We will be addressing the topic of pediatric immunizations through our Instagram and TikTok pages on Not Your Doc Pod or Doc Watts. We received questions that we hope to be able to address through today's conversation. And what we've asked all of our experts to address and think about is, what is the message you would like to get out to listeners that would be for their greatest benefit? And if you had the time to sit down and have a real discussion with each of your patients, because we know that time is limited, what would you want them to know about this topic? So before we get started, I just want to say just one small blurb that immunization is one of the most effective preventive health measures. According to data from the United States Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, the number of cases of most vaccine-preventable illnesses declined by greater than 90% after routine childhood immunizations were introduced. So I thought it would be helpful, Dr. Witt, I'll call you Mark, is that okay? I thought it would be helpful to review the list of the immunizations that are given and really give a brief explanation of what occurs with each of these diseases. Then the listener can truly be informed about the disease and the potential benefits of immunization. Does that sound okay?
Absolutely. Yep.
We'll just start with measles. If you can see this chart, so measles was really introduced in the 1960s, looks like maybe 1964, and you can see this dramatic decline. It's pretty impressive. So let's talk a little about measles for a second. Tell me what your thoughts are on that.
Sure. Obviously, a very relevant topic with an outbreak happening in Texas and parts of the Southwest. So measles, MMR, measles, mumps, rubella, is a combined shot that we do as part of the routine vaccine schedule at age 1 and then repeat it. So a booster at 5. And I believe the vaccine's been around since about what you said, 1970-ish. And we had in the United States basically eliminated measles or prevented measles as of 2000. And since that time, we've seen some outbreaks due to decreased vaccination rates. And that unfortunately leads to outbreaks. And I think we'll address it a little bit later. But we know one of the problems is when we don't vaccinate, then we also decrease what's called the herd immunity. And that herd immunity is very protective for our vulnerable people, babies that can't vaccinate or immunocompromised people. And that's what we've seen with this outbreak in Texas.
Will you give me some more details about what herd immunity is? What does that actually mean for all of our listeners?
Yeah, so herd immunity, the idea is that basically when you vaccinate, you not only protect yourself, but you're protecting others or the community, basically, right? And that vaccine helps the babies, say under one, that can't get vaccinated, or a child that's not getting chemotherapy or immunocompromised somehow, or for whatever reason can't get that vaccine. So that herd immunity was basically like dominoes. You get it, you protect somebody else, and else on down the road.
Okay, let's just address the MMR since we're really talking about it. Why do you think we have seen a decline? Why have we seen people choosing not to get that? What information has been out there that led
Yeah.
to that?
And I think MMR in particular is one that has lots of misconceptions around because, I think back in about, I think it's 1998, there was a study from a Dr. Wakefield, who's an English physician, who published some data linking MMR to autism. And that caused lots of consternation, obviously, amongst individuals and the population as a whole. Unfortunately, it did a lot of damage to vaccine rates, but I don't know if people really know, but basically, the study that he did really only had 12 kids in it. So a study of 12 people has
Wow.
snowballed, and good time to interject that it's been subsequently disproven, multiple studies, multiple times, multiple countries,
Yeah.
studies with 600,000 people. So that's a magnitude power above 12. And unfortunately, this Dr. Wakefield
Sure.
got into trouble. He's not able to practice medicine anymore because of that
Mm.
study. He falsified some information, I believe, and had some conflicts of interest. And it's really a shame that that became the driving point behind some of this hesitancy. And it's probably multifactorial, but that's unfortunate. And some
Wow.
prominent people in the national community, actors, actresses, that have commented on a link like that. And that also, I think, just further this into people's minds about this possible link. But again, the reality is it's
Mm.
been disproven. We don't know what's causing autism rates to be elevated. But again, the MMR shot's been around since the 70s. And here we are today without a real link. And in fact, a clear link that it's not MMR causing autism. And it's
Sure.
a story to be told still in terms of what that is. But I like some of the new information out there that probably kind of a cute little saying is we think it's the genes, not the vaccines. And so there's some genetic
No,
thing
I think that's right.
happening, but still with incredibly smart people, talented people spending their lives studying this, we still don't have a link. And to me, that speaks a lot because these people are very bright and brilliant. And if it was easy, they'd be figuring it out.
Yeah. Bright and brilliant and wanting to do the right things
Absolutely. Yep. So,
for the community.
yeah.
Do you think that part of the autism rates that are elevated is just a function of reporting? You're seeing these kids in your office. To me, it seems like the term autism is thrown around so much more now than it was when I was growing up, or what they call autism spectrum. You're on the spectrum. So is it an issue of reporting?
I think there's an element of that for sure. I think we're able to diagnose it more. There's clinics and whatnot just dedicated for this. We do know that the earlier we
Mhm.
diagnose it, the better. And sometimes that's hard because children may seem like they're on the spectrum, but it's just some sort of developmental issue that they'll mature out of or things like that. So it's hard, but it is clear that if we can make that diagnosis earlier, they can have better access to treatments and things that can help them. But I think that story's
Okay.
untold. Again, maybe it is that we are in this age where there's maybe more kids, more people come to the doctor, more people are worried about it. So it can tend to lead to increased diagnosis for sure.
Sure. That's good. All right, we're going to move on to mumps. Looks like mumps was introduced in 1967 as a vaccination, and we can see the rapid decline in mumps. So, talk to us a little bit about mumps. What is that disease? And
Yeah.
that's part of that MMR
Right. It's part of the our mumps has
combination.
also been around since that time and marked decrease. And I would say I'm a little gray, and most of us, because of vaccines, haven't seen these diseases. Like I think I've seen measles once in the hospital as a resident. Mumps causes some swelling, can cause some problems with infection in the testes in our boys,
Uh-huh.
and again had some morbidity in the past. But again, thankfully, we just don't see that too much because
Right. Yeah, it looks like if you look at the chart down by Then early 1980s, late 1970s, you're down to almost zero.
Yeah,
So
it's
interesting.
from a public health standpoint, vaccines have been a tremendous boon for us as families, as doctors for sure, and the community, because all
Yeah.
these things are preventable. And those charts are rather similar with almost all the vaccines, just they work. The science is sound, and that is really just a public health boon for us.
For sure. All right, let's talk about rubella. Looks like it was introduced maybe like 1960, 66, 67. And we see it at massive decline in that to zero as well. Talk a little bit about rubella.
It's the same thing. A lot of times when we see rubella, still it's a worry is it's transplacentally transferred. So from the moms to the baby. So if a mom's not
Right.
immune, then it can get transferred to the baby and have lots of congenital defects. Again, huge in terms of that's a lifetime issue that you have to deal with if you're born with a problem. And again, so we can get people vaccinated, it prevents these things for sure.
Yeah. I remember as a practicing obstetrician, we would always look at the immunity and give that MMR postpartum if they weren't immune. So that is a big deal.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to turn to diphtheria. It looks like diphtheria vaccination was introduced in 1945. So I don't know if that's something that's come across your plate as a practicing
Yeah,
clinician.
I would say thankfully not, but read about it and a lot of stories about that, especially with how painful and basically high mortality that was back in the day. Really bad
Wow.
throat infection. And I specifically remember reading a lot about that back in the 40s and 50s with soldiers and concentration camps and just malnourished, poorly
Mm,
treated. Those things, diphtheria in particular, was a thing that these unfortunate soldiers would die from. So as it would run through these
wow.
camps. So thankfully we don't see that again. But again, the fallacy is we could see it, but we just don't because of vaccinating against it.
Yeah. Crazy. Okay, let's talk about pertussis. This is something that was introduced in 1945, and you can see a massive decline, but you do see a little bit of bumps in that. So I know that we have seen that a little bit more. So let's talk about pertussis.
Yeah, pertussis is whooping cough, and it's a particular problem just mainly because of how contagious it is and how easy it is to spread in that family. And it's a particular problem for me because it really has a predilection for the younger children. They can get quite sick, end up in the ICU on ventilators because it's a very violent coughing illness. And once it gets in the
Hmm.
house, it's spread. So even though vaccination, a complete series can protect you 95, 98% of the time, it's so contagious that if it got into my house, I could get it and spread it. I probably won't get terribly sick. But again, if I have a little one at home, that's the vulnerable age that we're trying to protect.
Gotcha.
And we see those
Which gets
outbreaks.
the herd
Yep,
immunity,
yep.
right?
See those outbreaks. It's just, again, mainly because of the contagiousness. And that's part of what the measles outbreak is. It is so contagious. Two vaccines provides a 97%, but it is very contagious. So if you don't have that protection and get exposed, you're in the firing line, so to speak. And I just reviewed some
Mhm.
of that information last week about the measles outbreak. And when I did that, there was no cases reported in kids that had two vaccines. And the great majority were in kids that were unvaccinated, so no vaccines, and a few percent just had one vaccine. And again, that's probably that contagious. It's so contagious that they got exposed, just didn't quite have that immunity and got it. So, and a quick comment too: there's been reported deaths.
It's terrible. Definitely something that we want to not have in our community. Let's talk about tetanus. It's interesting. The tetanus chart is just not quite as sharp. We see it introduced in the 1940s, 1945. It's definitely a steady decline, but not the same kind of decline. Tell me about tetanus.
Yeah, so tetanus, the classic rusty nail, lockjaw, So put that in perspective. It's usually step on something or acquire it some other way, but from the soil usually. And it's very painful, muscle spasms. I think probably the reason that one isn't as sharp as a decline is that one typically requires boosters, say every 10 years. And so that
Yeah.
immunity
Okay.
must drop a little bit. And let's be honest, a lot of us as we get older, we just don't get that. And so that's probably part of that. But we do it for our kids as part of the DTP shot. So the T is tetanus. And so they're getting vaccinated throughout their childhood for that.
Gotcha. It's great. Okay, now this looks like something that was introduced during your training, which is invasive Haemophilus influenza, Hib disease. So
Right.
you've seen some probably changes during your time.
Yeah, Hib, and then maybe the next one, Prevnar, had been introduced during my practice career, if you will. And anecdotally, it's fun to start as a young doctor and learn from your mentors and practice partners. And they would tell stories of Hib meningitis that they would see quite often. And we just, again,
Wow.
just don't see it anymore because of the vaccines. Hib itself. So that Haemophilus influenza type B is a big cause of meningitis, so a brain infection, swelling, hydrocephalus, just lots of potential problems from meningitis. Big one being death, of course, too. But another one was that it loved to cause this infection called epiglottitis, which is an infection basically at the base of your throat area. And
Yeah.
that fevers and cause lots of problems and be a really tricky situation to manage. And then the vaccine came, and that invasive disease is, we just don't see it unless there's a non-vaccinated individual typically. But yeah, it's been huge to not have to worry about that.
Yeah. And you see the decline almost goes to zero
Yeah, like I said,
from
it's so
1985. It's
uncommon
amazing.
anymore. They're remarkable.
It's great. All right. We're going to talk. This is a huge one, polio. If you want to just comment on polio, and it looks like it was introduced maybe 1955, 56.
Yeah, polio.
So,
Polio is an interesting story. Again, talking to my father and his parents, my grandparents, polio struck fear in that generation, and stories of people lining
mhm.
up for blocks to get their polio vaccine. And we still see it. We have not eradicated in the world, and it does tend to spread in areas that underserved or war, where medical access and care drops. In my career, when I first started, we did an oral polio vaccine, so a little squirt in the mouth. And basically, in the United States, we had eradicated polio, except for a few cases a year that came from the oral polio vaccine. It's called the live vaccine, so people could shed it and
Mm.
maybe give that polio to somebody else because of how that shedding worked. The CDC had said, well, okay, we're not seeing polio. We have a shot for it that does not cause this potential risk of polio in the community. So we switched to the shot. And again, same thing. We just don't have that risk of vaccine associated polio. But again, the rates are, thank goodness we don't see polio anymore. And I think it's that fear that was in people's minds back in my parents and their parents. And just a tremendous thing to see that we don't see these things. Just anecdotally, one of my best friends when I was growing up, his father had polio and he was in a wheelchair. It really impacted his life, of course. He still was
For sure.
successful in all sorts of great things, but he was in a wheelchair from the time he was a young man till he passed away. So tragic. But again, we just don't see that anymore, polio.
Yeah. Both of my wife's grandparents had polio. So I think it's definitely around. And I think we're seeing a generation that hasn't seen it and maybe questioning.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's interesting when you talk to older generations, that fear, right? I think fear now, I don't know quite, you can't speak for others because, of course, being a vaccine advocate and pro-vaccine all day long is complacency has set in. And sometimes I'll get that question, why do we need it if we don't see it? And things like that. And so I think that fear has been replaced a little bit by complacency. And that
Mhm.
complacency can, of course, lead to unvaccinated rates. And then we could be, back to square one sometimes with we've really eradicated.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so is Prevnar, is that related to the pneumococcal
Yeah, so
disease?
Prevnar is
I've got a chart, looks
yep.
like.
So Prevnar is the vaccine that
Okay.
came out in my practice, and Prevnar is a vaccine against strep pneumonia, which is one member of the strep germ in particular loves to cause meningitis in our babies and pneumonias
Mm,
and bloodstream infections or sepsis and some ear infections for sure. The big thing that invasive is the key there. Meningitis was a big problem and it's a huge decrease with that. And same, we really protect this pneumonia. It tends to be a really awful form of pneumonia. And so again, it's just been nice to not have to worry about that meningitis because the brain, especially in a young one, is a very fragile organ, and that inflammatory infectious process can really cause a lot of problems we don't deal with.
okay, that's great. Let me see. There's just a few others that we may want to talk about. How about RSV? I
Yes.
know that's been a new introduction, and maybe talk about it and
Yeah.
how's it administered and stuff.
Sure. So RSV is a respiratory virus that tends to be very seasonal. Again, tends to pick on the lungs of our little ones. Once children get well in that two range, it tends to not be as big of a problem. So they came out with this shot just recently. Science behind that is very interesting. It's actually what's called a monoclonal antibody. This one is for kids and moms, and we can talk about that. But that's the difference is that the Prevnar vaccine or the measles vaccine, you're basically trying to induce immunity for life and stimulate that immune system to have this response ready. The monoclonal antibody is,
And for the body to create its own
yeah, to
that's
stimulate
correct.
the immune system to create that. Absolutely. Yep, for sure. And the
Yeah,
difference is this monoclonal antibody is basically giving the body the antibodies, but it doesn't induce the body to produce that. So it's a temporary protection.
gotcha.
And temporary, we think, is a season. So it's somewhere about 6 months. But it's been wonderful to be able to do that because most of us practicing pediatricians probably have images seared into our brains of these poor babies struggling to breathe and looking at you helpless,
Mhm,
going, help me. And it's just sad. They
mhm.
just get so congested. It gets in their lungs. They have trouble breathing, wheezing, cough. And because it's a virus, there's really treatment is supportive. It's oxygen if they need it, suction, but really because it gets in their lungs, a number of babies will end up in the hospital on oxygen. So this new antibody has been out 2 years, and it's actually interesting in that there's one for babies or one for moms. And so if a mom gets it while she's pregnant, at least 2 weeks before she's due, there is then that ability for that antibody to cross into the baby and then provide that protection. And when they look at it, it looks like we prevent 80% of severe RSV disease, which basically for me means hospitalization
Wow.
from that. So again, mom or baby. And we have, again, I think they'll get lots more information about it. And I bet those rates go up in terms of prevention, but it seems super safe. Haven't had any side effects of note. I haven't heard anything about it. And I'm a big fan of it because it's one of our worst things we see all winter long. So it's been a nice additional tool in our toolbox. And parents will ask, would you do it, Dr. Witt, for your babies? And I think I'm funny sometimes and say, I'd do it every week if I could because RSV is such a bad thing. Obviously, you can't do that. But the answer is yes, I'm all for it.
Yeah. And so do you stop giving it after the age of 2?
Yeah,
The
so it's interesting. As
antibody.
of right now, the way it's written, you can give it from birth to 8 months of age. And then just in
Wow.
terms of
Okay.
how the manufacturer, and sometimes those things change, but as of the current thing is you have to be under 8 months of age and in that season to get that.
Because that's probably how the study protocols did it, right?
Yeah. And again, the other idea is that as children get older, it doesn't quite cause the significant problems that we see when these babies are young.
Okay, that's great. All right, we're going to turn to hepatitis B. I know this is one that's given right soon after birth, and maybe I think we had one listener have a question about that. Is there appropriate to delay, and why would we give it at birth?
So hepatitis B is a bloodborne hepatitis. So it's a virus that infects your liver. The long-term complications, it can lead to liver cancer, liver failure. You and I have had this vaccine to get into school and be around patients, and it wasn't around when we were young, but it's now commonplace to do right at birth. And then we do it as part of our routine vaccine series, or that primary series of vaccines at 2, 4, and 6 months. And the idea is, I think, for me anyway, to give it to those children because it's very safe, very effective, and will provide that lifetime immunity. Because it's a bloodborne pathogen, I think of it spread basically through sex and drugs. And of course, that's where sometimes these questions come up. And in a vacuum, that answers babies aren't at risk for that necessarily, but the idea is protect them long term. And we honestly struggle to get kids in when they're in those active ages, teenagers and whatnot. And we try to get them in every year for physicals and well checks, but often we aren't super successful on that. And so the idea would be to provide that immunity for them from the get-go. And anecdotally, we all have had stories where it's good to have that protection if a child does step on. I've had kids step on needles at the parks or at the beach or things like that. It's very anxiety inducing moment for parents, but the vaccine should protect those instances, or bloody noses from a neighbor coming over, those kind of things. It's unlikely, but again, nice to have that protection. In terms of side effects, we can give it in babies. There's not even fevers or things like that. So it's super safe. That's why we recommend getting it over with and getting it done when they're babies.
Okay, that's great. How about rotavirus?
Yeah, rotavirus is actually, so rotavirus itself is a virus that causes lots of diarrhea, vomiting, dehydration, big complications. And this one is a drink. So it's a little squirt in the mouth. Again, we do it at 2, 4, 6 months. And it's been remarkable how much decrease we see in terms of babies that are hospitalized, or even kids that are hospitalized. I think I spent most of my residency dealing with RSV hospitalized babies and rotavirus. And I think maybe, I don't have any numbers, but it's so rare anymore that I see a child and say, wow, I think you're dehydrated from a gastroenteritis or potential rotavirus. It's just amazing. And again, super well tolerated, just a little squirt. And again, just been remarkable in terms of how clinically that's made my life quite a bit easier in terms of these dehydrated babies.
Yeah. I always remember the acronym for rota, right out the anus.
If you've ever had it, that's probably a fair description.
That's great. All right. How about influenza?
Yeah, so influenza is a little bit different because it's a yearly vaccine that we recommend. It's just a difficult one because it's a virus that adapts quickly and changes. And so we recommend it to anybody 6 months and older. We see a lot of secondary pneumonias from influenza, and there's multiple types of influenza, A, B, swine flu. There's just these different variants, and the vaccine helps us. It's a difficult target. That's the problem with influenza. The immunity is a tricky thing to pin down. So sometimes what happens is that the virus drifts or shifts as it comes across from the southern hemisphere. But it is clear that vaccinated children, even if the match isn't perfect, do much better. So even though this strain might not be a perfect match, it does protect to a degree for sure. This year, we've had a really rough influenza year with lots of kids being sick with it, and 105, 104 fevers for days, and lots of secondary pneumonias this year. So it's been a particularly rough influenza year.
Wow. And I still think we have about 150,000 deaths per year from it.
Yeah, it loves to get the people that are maybe not quite as robust in terms of their immune system, so young and old. And it's really that secondary pneumonia, particularly, that's a bad one.
Let's talk about COVID-19. I know that this is the one that I think has evoked this fear of immunizations and people not wanting to use the term immunizations or vaccines. So maybe comment about that a little bit for us. Use in childhood.
Yeah, so I think that has been an interesting dilemma that has stoked a little bit of fear, I think, because maybe people were worried that it may not have been studied so well, which I think it wasn't true, but it just came out fast. And to me, that's amazing, because here we had, from the terms of this potentially horrible infection, which for a lot of people was and still can be, to have a vaccine at warp speed was a pretty impressive feat of science from my standpoint. And I mentioned before, people lining up to get the polio vaccine in the past. Me and all my partners, we lined up day one when that vaccine was available to get that. And we have a funny picture of us all getting our
Yeah.
shots. And again, that technology, particularly the mRNA, it turns out that technology has been around for years and years, but just to apply it to something like this and to do it so quickly was, like I said, super impressive. And I think it really, despite unfortunate outcomes for a lot of people with COVID, that the vaccine clearly did prevent lots of other problems and kept a lot of people healthy. But I think that because it came down maybe more from the government and it came down fast, that people were, and I think it's an interesting thing in that I think science is fascinating, but what we knew 5 years ago is not what we know today. And I think it evolves and it changes. And I think the best information that we had at that time was this could be very bad, and it was, but particularly in children, they seem to be uniquely protected. And again, not that some bad things didn't happen and kids had some really bad outcomes, but for the most part, it was more of a blessing for us because it didn't affect our kids as much as we thought. But we still gave plenty of vaccines out. And again, I think it helped a lot of people. And I think it also helped a lot of people to get their children vaccinated, to keep themselves healthy and to keep their grandparents healthy and all that. But yeah, so
the herd immunity.
Again, back to that, getting people that protection.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so we just have, I think, two more, which is varicella and hepatitis A. So I'll let you do whatever order you want to do for those.
Yeah. So chickenpox or varicella is chickenpox. Chickenpox, again, probably people you're in my age there remember chickenpox parties, and it just someone had chickenpox, you'd go over to their house and get exposed and felt miserable and all those kinds.
Gosh, I don't remember those parties.
Maybe it's us dumb people from Wisconsin. I'm not sure. But the idea was to get exposed, get it over with. And then the vaccine was developed, which basically took away any of that worry, right? You're vaccinated, you're protected. Again, that one's a 2-shot series as well, just like the MMR. And the people sometimes say, what's the big deal of chickenpox? And the big deal, again, there's two things. One, that's a problem that if you have chickenpox, you typically get these pox lesions for sometimes a good week or more. And for parents, that means you're taking a week off of work. So there's a definite social, economic problem in terms of, and if we have more than one kid, so that it's again a little bit dominoes, that other child's going to get it and you might be missing weeks of work. And so there is an element there, but the big element from a medical standpoint is that varicella causes lots of skin infections. There is still a significant worry of some mortality risk there. I think we see about 100 people, maybe 50 to 100 in the United States die yearly of chickenpox, which isn't a huge number, but boy, if it's somebody you know, that's terrible. And again, the vaccine is given in 2 shots or 2 doses. Usually we do it at 1 and 5 and can prevent some of those things.
Yeah.
Oh, and then hepatitis A.
Chickenpox in pregnancy is a real problem, can cause pneumonia and really sick moms.
Yeah, for sure. Hepatitis B is bloodborne. Hepatitis A is more foodborne. We had incidences back 20-some years ago that were quite high and nobody could figure it out. And finally, the idea was just let's vaccinate. It must be coming somehow from children because it didn't seem to be coming from food handlers. That was the big risk. You go out to eat, somebody has it on their hands, they make your food, you eat it, then you get it. And it's a very violent flu-like illness that infects your liver. You turn quite jaundiced. It's dehydrated. It's generally self-limiting, but can leave you with some lingering liver problems. And honestly, since the state has required that vaccine to get into kindergarten, I haven't seen a case of hepatitis A in about that time, 20 years. It's been amazing. Again, super safe.
Wow.
I literally haven't seen hepatitis A in that period of time. So it's been an amazing vaccine for us.
That's great. Okay, we're going to talk, I think I missed one, HPV vaccine. And I think this is where we get into, I think, more of the conversation of what we call oncogenic viruses or oncoviruses, which are viruses that create cancers. So talk to me about HPV vaccines for both boys and girls.
Yeah, so HPV has probably been out, I don't know the exact time, but 15, 20 years, I'll say.
Maybe a little under 20 years.
Yeah, somewhere in that range. And I think that, to me, it's actually a little bit mind-blowing because I honestly think that if you would have told me in medical school when I was sitting in those lectures and somebody would have said, hey, we have a vaccine in your lifetime that will be able to prevent a form of cancer, I might have laughed you off the stage. I don't know about you, Dr. Watts, but to me, that
Yeah,
is like that technology, that science is
for
just,
sure.
it's just technology changes so fast that literally mind blowing to me, because I think as a parent too, we try everything to keep our kids safe, right? We try to get them to eat healthy, sleep well, and exercise, and put sunscreen on, all these things that promote healthy lifestyles and obviously can prevent or minimize cancer risk. But this actually prevents it. It is a two-shot series as well. It originally came out for girls because of the risk of cervical cancer. And maybe you can speak more on that. For me, cervical cancer is a worry because of infertility and that big issue, but it came out for girls. And then a few years afterwards, they licensed it for boys. And we have been giving it to both boys and girls since that time. Again, for boys, the big risk is it causes lots of oral pharyngeal or throat cancers. And I think the most recent number I saw for boys, because mom's, I don't need to give it to my boys. And then we'll talk a little bit more about that. But I think I saw about maybe 40,000 new cases of oral pharyngeal cancers in young men. So that's significant. And the virus itself is transmitted sexually. And so that's, I think, a big hang up for a lot of people. We know that, anyway, I always say this again, because I think probably some of my humor, if I'm talking to a young lady's mom, Mr. Wonderful is Mr. Wonderful, but he might not have been so wonderful when he was 15 or 16. So we're just trying to protect your little one from anything that, might have happened in the past. And so we can vaccinate as early as 9. Sometimes we push that a little bit to the junior high age and just get that vaccine done at that point, and then have that protection ongoing. It is also interesting, and I don't know the numbers anymore, but they've also started to see an increase of HPV in older women. And so
Mm.
now the vaccine, I think there's a range where I think you can give it up to age 35 or something like that, maybe 40. I don't know. But
Yeah,
a lot of that has to do with some risks, as if people are divorced and getting remarried, and they're seeing higher rates in that situation.
right.
So that vaccine's now available for a little bit broader age range.
Wow. This is an interesting statistic. In 2023, the American Cancer Society reported that the oral pharyngeal cancers diagnosis had increased to 58,450, of which 70 to 80% of them are secondary to HPV, and two-thirds of those are in males.
Yeah, and that probably gets,
HPV is a big deal.
no, that's probably gets close to that number that I was referencing, 40,000 new cases in.
Yeah. I remember counseling patients about the vaccine, and to say that it really, amongst sexually active women, you're going to see about 60% of the population will actually carry HPV. So it's a pretty prevalent virus as well that's around, and we don't know about it. We don't know if it's present. There's really not a ton of symptoms. So
Yeah,
it's a
it's,
good one to be
and
vaccinated
in
for.
particular, besides the oral pharyngeal cancer, unfortunately, I think it does preferentially cause more problems in females than males. Males can be rather asymptomatic,
Yeah,
and that's a problem if you don't know it.
great. Okay, great coverage of all those vaccinations. I just need to ask this question. One of our listeners asked, if you want to spread out your child's immunizations, what's the best way to go about that?
Yeah. So again, great question. I think that the bottom line answer on that is that there are some internet or social media driven schedules for vaccines, delayed schedules, so to speak. So there's no science behind these schedules. The science is, and the immunologic responses have been studied with our traditional schedule, not so much with these delayed schedules. So I'm okay with it. I mean, my big goal is to get parents vaccinated, or get children vaccinated, sorry, but I can't be confident that you get the same immune response that we would get in the traditional schedule, but I think it's certainly way better than nothing. And if it makes parents feel better, great. What I'll often see is that a parent will, at that first 2-month visit, have some hesitancy and not want to do the shots, and they'll try to split them up a little bit, and we'll work with them on that. And often they'll come back at the 4-month visit or the 6-month visit and say, Dr. Witt, that was way too hard. That was way too much work. And just get them to me on time and we're good. And so that is something that I do see, which is interesting and fun, because it validates what we're doing. I think there's
Sure.
another problem that I see with delaying the vaccines is that usually if I see a child at their 2-month visit, I'm talking about the vaccines. I know what we're giving. Whereas if we delay the vaccines, oftentimes parents will come back in, say, in a week or two or a month to get another vaccine. And it's a little bit tricky to track that. They may see a medical assistant or a nurse, and they're just looking at the schedule and saying, hey, it looks like you're due for this or that. And so you can sometimes see that the vaccine, it's not that it's not given correctly, but say, hey, let's do this. And whoever the caregiver will say yes. And the other caregiver that maybe wasn't at that visit will say, oh, I didn't want that vaccine right now. And so it wasn't that we did it wrong. It's just that it creates more
Sure.
confusion sometimes. So I always tell parents, just write down your schedule. Let's put it in the medical record so we know what we're doing to make sure that you're getting those vaccines. And again, it's not that it was wrong. It's just that it was not communicated well.
Gotcha. So if you spread out your child's immunizations, do you end up giving the baby more shots?
It depends. And then that's an issue that I think we've showed some questions about why so many shots. The answer is because of science and the ability to prevent some of these things like Hib, Prevnar, HPV. They're all new. Some of the meningitis shots that we do as teenagers, and it's just all because of science. And as I was thinking about that, again, picking on myself, I think it was 1995, we were vaccinating against 7 or 8 illnesses only. And now we're up to 15 or 16. Okay.
Wow.
And I'm also pretty sure in 1995, Darren, we would not be able to have this video podcast because I don't think I had a cell phone in 1995. So technology, and that's the same thing with vaccines. So it's just the science evolves. We're able to protect these things. There's just advancements. And that's why there's more shots, because we can vaccinate against more things. And so there is the chance that it depends on the question of, do you end up getting more vaccines? It just depends on what that is set up to do, but often it does. So sometimes parents don't want the combined vaccines, which is we do DTP, polio, and hepatitis B together, typically as the primary vaccines at 2, 4, and 6 months. So if parents are on an alternate schedule, they'll often get somewhere on the order of potentially 4 or so more shots in those first few months.
Gotcha. Just to add, I think in 1995, the Utah Jazz were actually a good basketball team as well.
Yeah. So maybe soon again.
One listener asks, is it true that you don't need to vaccinate an infant who is exclusively breastfed? And I think we've talked about the science of that, but maybe talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. And the answer is no. Breast or bottle. While breastfeeding does provide some immunity, a baby has to develop their own immune system. And the power of that breastfed baby immunity is not enough to protect against these diseases. And breast or bottle, we still need to vaccinate because it just doesn't provide enough
immunity.
Yeah.
That's great. This is one other listener asked the question that my babies are in the 5th percentile. Is there any difference in the schedule for somebody who has babies that are in the 90th percentile? And I think what they're referring to is 5th percentile in weight, 90th percentile in weight.
Yeah, that's what I'm guessing too, is that it's probably weight based. And so the answer is there's no difference in the schedule. And it has to just do with the immune system is not weight based. It's a sort of a memory based system. And in fact, maybe if our babies are 5th percent or 1%, they're probably very healthy, but it's potentially, it could be a sign that they're premature and really need those vaccines on time and on schedule to really protect them equally as the 90%.
Yeah. That's a good answer. Thank you. One of our listeners also asked, which immunizations do you recommend and which are not necessary? And she specifically said, and don't say none. So I think this is a great question, because I think really here you've heard all the diseases, and I'd love your comment on it. But my comment is, I think it's up to you to decide which diseases you are fine to let your kids have or which ones you don't want. And maybe comment on that. And I'm sure you have this question in your clinic.
Yep, all the time. I think that your answer is correct. It's obviously, from my standpoint, that they're all important to do. And it is, again, what risk are you willing to accept? And I think the biggest one that I get is hepatitis B. And I think we addressed that a little bit in terms of why is that necessary as a baby. And so that's the big one that parents have some questions about why. And I think, again, the addressing is that let's protect them now. We don't have to worry about those things later on, is my answer.
Mhm.
But I think you're right. Yeah. It's just, I don't know. You're a parent, Darren. You probably remember those days.
Yeah.
There's some guilt, right? Like they just, these kids, they get you. They're just, it's hard. It's just hard to be a parent. And I think that with these diseases that we can prevent, I can't imagine sometimes how I could personally live with that guilt if I knew I could prevent something and didn't when my baby suffered. And again, I think at the end of the day, all of us parents are just trying to do the best we can. And again, I'm try not to be judgmental at all, but it's just that I think about that would be a tough one for me.
Yeah. That's a great answer. And I think it leads us to our next question, which is how do you respond to those who do not want to immunize their kids?
Yeah, again, good. We do a lot. And I think it's an interesting discussion because I like to try to figure out where is the misconception? What has that parent or parents been told? Is it a particular vaccine? What can we do to get you the science? And then again, it's up to you to do it. We try to address the vaccine issue even at the 2-week visit, even though we're not doing any vaccines at that visit, to just start introducing it. Say, hey, next time at 2 months, there's going to be vaccines. And do you have any questions? And so we start there. I'll often refer parents to a book by one of the big vaccine advocates, a pediatrician, Dr. Paul Offit. He's written a really wonderful book. I think it's called Vaccines in Your Child, maybe separating fact from fiction or something like that. But it's a really good book. It goes through all of the kind of pros, cons, stories, the myths. It goes over the whole MMR thing, but it's very well written and it's not too science numbers crunched. It's just very well done. So we'll try to do that. And again, I think it's a job to just educate. And again, maybe we can't change minds, but it is just that process of educating, talking, maybe alleviating some of those myths that are out there.
That's great. I'm sure you're a calming voice to provide the myth busting.
It's
Yeah.
an interesting spot to be in because I'm as pro-vaccine as they get. And again, I think maybe on my tombstone, I want it written that he vaccinated lots of kids as a big public health service. But I
Really.
do understand. I get it. It's a tough spot. These parents really don't want to do any harm and they want to do what's right, but I just think they just get inundated with the squeaky wheels, I would say, that are on the internet and that are in their ear and that are saying, what about this, what about that, and why are we doing this? And I think it's an interesting issue, but I think science and reading science-based stuff must be boring, whereas the squeaky wheels, a blogger or a movie star saying this, it's sensational and that sticks. And the
Couldn't agree.
science is hard to get over, I think, for a lot of these people. And I do think people sometimes have conspiracy theories, and there's just none. The vaccines I've given to my kids are the same that we give every day. There's not a special batch for me or anybody else. They're all the same. It's hard, and I think it is our job to try to educate and try to understand where this is coming from and make sure they understand what potential risks are out there.
Yeah, great answer. The next question that one of our listeners had is this: what have been the issues about the safety and backing of immunizations? I think we've answered that. But RFK has previously made statements that there is no vaccine that is safe and effective. I actually heard it from his lips. But then in the Senate hearing, he says, I am in support of vaccines, and partly that may come from just education. But should we worry that we're not going to see immunizations as a result of his being in charge of the health association for our country?
I can't imagine that. I think calmer heads will prevail on that. I certainly don't think it helps some of these
Yeah.
moms that are on the fence with should I vaccinate? Who do I listen to? And when it's coming from the top, times that weighs heavily. So I'm sure it's not helpful downstream for us practicing clinicians. But I think we time after time have shown that vaccines are effective and there's not a lot of debate about that. So no, I don't envision a world where there's vaccines are taken away.
Great. Love it. All right. One listener asked this: can we actually trust the government funded research for accurate information regarding vaccines? And maybe while you're thinking about that, I have a brother who's in research and he's in the private sector. And you realize how much time and money is in the process of research and development. And if you're looking at all private sector research for these, you would imagine that the cost of a vaccine, from the cost it must required to do all the research to then put it to the patient has got to be just inordinate amounts. And so I think it's really the only way that we can have really a product that is somewhat affordable is to have government funding along these lines in research and development.
And I would agree and certainly second that. And I think there's layers of protection from advisory committees to the CDC. And those, in theory, are not political positions. They're hopefully science based, doing the right thing,
Right.
advocating positions. There's even reporting systems for vaccines that if we start seeing things, they're constantly surveilling and watching those things. Parents can report it. Anybody can report those things, and they're constantly looking at that. The answer to me is yes. And again, I agree with your point about how expensive these things are. I think those layers of protection that make it safe are really what's important.
Yeah, this has been great. And I think the synopsis is that we know that vaccination programs, they directly benefit the immunized child, but they also indirectly benefit the unimmunized person through this, what we call herd immunity. I think that we take it upon ourselves to not just protect our own selves, but also the population by doing this, especially for those who are unimmunized, those who are maybe contraindicated to be vaccinated or immunocompromised. So I think this is a big deal. And it's been such a great time to be with you, Dr. Witt, from the ping pong table to the podcast. This has been awesome. So thanks.
Yes,
Hey,
enjoyed
I'm
it.
just going to ask you the final thing, the 5 things that you would never do as a doctor. So that will just be our concluding delivery.
I'm going to take my doctor hat off and say one thing I would never do, just generally, it would be skydive. I don't ever willingly want to be jumping out of a plane. That just seems scary. Another thing I'm not real big on would be scuba diving. I'm a land lover and enjoy my time on land a little bit more than in the deep. I think there's too many things down there that would be scary for me. And, I don't know that I can go any more than that, Darren. I did do a topic on our own website, a couple of things that you wouldn't let your own kids do. And so
Wow.
as a pediatrician, for me on the answer, trampolines are a big one in terms of injuries, that there can be safe trampolines too. But trampolines are a big one. I said sleepovers. I wouldn't let my kids do sleepovers. Again, it's a personal thing. I just see too many bad things from basically an abuse standpoint where your child's
Yeah.
over there, you don't know who else is in that house, who comes over. And plus I remember sleepovers as a kid myself. I came home grumpy and my parents were helmets, obviously, and seatbelts. Again, you talk about prevention, and as pediatricians, those are the top of our list in terms of things that I wouldn't let my kids go unbuckled in a car and always wear their helmets. So anyway, a little bit of a phony answer, but there you go.
Those are good. No, those are great. Thank you very much. I love it. I'm just going to end this with just a few statements. Thanks for being with us again, Dr. Witt. Thank you to all those who made this possible. You can find us on Instagram and TikTok at Not Your Doc Pod or Doc Watts. You can also find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and YouTube to get the video version. And that's on Not Your Doc Anymore. Thank you for the leadership of Not Your Doc Podcasts, LLC. Natalie Watts serves as our president and CEO. Our social managers are Taylor Seaberg, Emily Brown, and Sarah Marion. And our production manager is Joshua Watts. And I just need to clarify that the medical advice or any procedural advice do not substitute for your own professional medical consultation. And listeners and viewers need to be aware of the limitations of the information that's provided on this podcast generally. So thanks again, Mark. This has been amazing.